Full spectrum is a new technique that allows you to mix filaments to make the perception of new colours. Whether you've seen it, used it or not, we're going to take a very deep dive into this rabbit hole today. We will look into what makes the effect work, how you choose colours, how you use full spectrum, and importantly why sometimes it looks really good and sometimes it looks less good, and why there's more to it than just layer height, because there is science behind this. Let's go. This video is sponsored by Snapmaker. If you find yourself tempted by the convenience of running full spectrum in the way that I have throughout this video, with auto-detect RFID colours that feed back into the slicer from the machine and relatively low waste along with good print speeds, then I would suggest having a look at the Snapmaker U1. Almost all of the prints in this video are printed on the Snapmaker U1, with half of the samples actually being printed on my Beta U1 unit, the one that I used to make a review starting over a year ago. So I've had over a year of use on and off with that machine, which has given me basically zero issues, which is so remarkable you'd assume that I'm paid to say it, but it's actually true. I will put links to the U1 and filaments in the description, so please do check those out. On the 14th of February 2026, a Reddit post linking to an unlisted video was posted showing a multicolour cube on a Snapmaker U1 being printed with what appeared to be a continuous spectrum between blue and yellow. The poster reported that another user had noticed that his prime tower was showing colours that were different to the original filament used for their print. He himself went on to make a Blender tool, and that's not what this video is about, which is fortunate because I don't understand Blender at all. But what happened in parallel to that is what we are going to be looking at today, when online user Ratdo, aka Radu, took this idea and, by integrating it into a fork of the Snapmaker version of Orca Slicer, made what we now know as full spectrum. The inconvenient reality is that what I see with my eyes is not what you'll see if you're viewing this video, and this is partly my fault. The equipment that I use is too high resolution. My style is reliant on close-ups, but also for other reasons we'll get onto later on in Chapter 5. If I went through this whole video filming everything just as is on camera with my usual kind of quality, you'd leave wondering why anyone is using full spectrum at all. Full spectrum relies on tricking the eyes, not the camera, so I suggest a compromise. For many parts of this video, I will implement a filter that will bring the experience much closer to the natural viewing experience of full spectrum, and apparently my eyes work perfectly well, so it's representative. When that's the case, you'll see this symbol. Full spectrum's operation is not too tricky to explain, fundamentally. It relies on a concept known as dithering. This, in this particular context, is a technique where you alternate colours close to each other in order to fool the human eye into thinking it's seeing a different colour that technically doesn't exist. You'd be surprised how many places you don't see dithering, where in fact dithering exists. It's commonly used in professional printing, it's used on screens, displays, it's used on those silly GIFs that you keep sharing online, video games, newspapers, and so on. It's kind of everywhere in daily life, but we never really see it. While dithering has been done before on 3D prints, quite a while ago actually, it has never been included as standard functionality in a slicer. That is probably because the vast majority of dithering in the world is done via some kind of dot or pixel-based pattern. There had to be a leap to thinking about doing it via stripes instead, so that the printer could easily handle it. And about the printer, to really effectively use full spectrum, you need to be using a multicolour printer, but with full spectrum, you're guaranteeing at least one colour change every layer. And we'll get to that theory in a moment, but you're also likely to be using fairly small layer heights, at least 0.16mm or below, so it's not hard to see why you will waste a lot of filament and time with an AMS-based multicolour system, or multicolour systems in those kinds of families. There is nothing stopping you from doing that if you want, but it just works so much faster and less wastefully, and potentially less wear on the machine if you're using a tool changer type machine. That being said, as things stand, the bulk of the development is probably prioritizing Snapmaker hardware anyway, because Radu, the developer, has been working with Snapmaker and the U1 to develop full spectrum because he's recently been hired by them. You aren't actually locked into the Snapmaker ecosystem in any particular way. Full spectrum was originally made on a fork of Snapmaker Orca. I will put a graphic up on screen to try and explain your options. The full spectrum fork is not the latest and probably not the version that you generally want to use, although it does have some features that are still experimental, like bias. We'll get to that. The more slick version of the code has been moved over to mainline Snapmaker Orca, And depending on how long it takes me to get this video out, then a version of full spectrum may or may nearly be in Orca Slicer itself too. I've actually got a build of it, and I can tell you it closely resembles the Snapmaker Orca fork in terms of UI and functionality, so I expect we're not far off a more unified experience across slicers where full spectrum will work the same in most slicers in some form. That, of course, does not include Prusa and Bamboo, who have currently implemented their own versions. I suspect that will become problematic as time goes on, as full spectrum is very likely to outpace those almost immediately because of the ongoing development, but that is not what this video is about. Using full spectrum is not difficult at all. Each version has the same section under filaments where you might have mixed filaments already displayed when you start the program up, or you might have none and you might have to add them. Adding a mixed color uses one of the 4 tabs: ratio, cycle, match, or gradient. With the exception of gradient, the first 3 kind are different versions of the same thing. You're effectively picking 2 or 3 colors and ratioing them out and getting a resulting pattern of lines, or asking it to figure that out for you. If you want to use all 4 colours, at the moment you seem to have to use the pattern tab and type them in manually. Gradient is currently an odd one because it works differently in Orca compared to the Snapmaker fork. That is to say, gradient in the fork tries to actively not show lines by showing the relative heights of extrusions between the top and bottom, which, while very cool, isn't that visible in most of my tests, as you can see. The full spectrum mentality generally seems to be towards trying not to show obvious lines in the colour changes, but we are about to see why that might be interesting. If you're using the full spectrum fork, which is currently the only place that it's implemented, there's also a cool feature that allows you to bias, meaning set back or forward, one of the mixed colours compared to the other. This is useful if one colour is massively dominating the other. So when you've added your intermediate colours, it's just painting as usual in the slicer. They behave as normal filament colours would. Only when you slice do you see the horrors you've probably unleashed before you learn to use mixers a bit more gently. I would say that the preview is a surprisingly good proxy for the real result, so don't assume it won't be. It does seem to be, and it becomes pretty evident quite soon that if you look at other people's results online compared to your results at home, either they're cheating somehow, or you're going to have to put these prints quite far away, or there's some learning to do. Classical colour theory tells us that blending 2 colours together in close proximity can create the illusion of a secondary colour. Classical photography, however, tells us that there's lines on this cube. If I show you this cube, at least if you aren't watching on a large screen, you might agree that this one looks like a single colour, but this one, you might agree that it doesn't. Obviously, your experience is going to vary depending on how you're viewing this, so we won't get a consensus on video, but I think you get the idea. These colours are not mixing consistently, or they're not mixing predictably. And you might jump to try to yell an explanation at the screen as to why this is doing this, but I guarantee you're almost entirely likely to be wrong. To really understand what's going on with full spectrum's dithering, the hint was in the title card. This is an exploit of the way the eye works. Specifically, it's an exploit of 2 things the eye does that the camera doesn't. And weirdly, one of those things transfers over video. Decades of research have told us, and obviously I'm simplifying it for the sake of explanation, but the human eye prioritizes brightness, technical term luminance, over colour. It does this quite a lot. It doesn't exactly split an image into luma and chroma information the same way that you might do in a video codec, but it might not be that far off the reality. And the human eye is very much more sensitive to luminance, i.e. brightness, when you're talking about spatial resolution and motion. That is the hint that we need to understand why some of these colours don't blend in terms of our visual perception. And I don't know why I find this funny, but I do, because once again, just like in the HueForge video, we're explaining a video about colour by using black and white. What do you see here? What you maybe don't realise you see here is the power move in finding colours that match when preparing them for use with full spectrum. Let me explain. Colour images contain colour data in, let's say, 3 channels, red, blue and green, as there's filters in a camera that split them out, and that is encoded in 3 channels, so that when you reconstruct it you get the original image. Black and white images, however, they need only contain 1 piece of data per pixel, luminance. So I can clearly show you that this filament here does not match this filament here. And these filaments are not black and white as they may look. This is actually blue and yellow. This is the same blue and yellow that were causing this absolute disaster here. Turning that image into black and white shows us the luminance mismatch, exactly where we'd expect it. It's literally the mismatch in brightness between these colour bands. And of course, because of the reasons we just explained, the human eye is going to pick that out really well. So the solution to this should be pretty simple. Pick colours that are close together in luminance, right? Yeah, but maybe not so fast. I said 2 things that the eye does. There's another way that we can exploit the eye to make even incompatible luminances work together, up to a point. This is because of the way our eye interprets small details and the ability to resolve very fine details, and our eyes will, if the lines are fine enough, overlook absolutely everything we've just talked about, and it will just average out the colours. This part is probably what explains why someone might say that a print looks better in person, specifically about a full spectrum print, and they are right. Cameras have a tendency to increase local contrast, so that they're generally going to enhance lines when we actually want to do the opposite. Which, if you're interested in trying to minimise that effect in photos, you're better off using a RAW mode or some kind of mode where the processing's turned off. So things like standard or natural instead of vivid modes. So how does this get us to a unified theory of making prints look nice? It's actually not too complicated. I think you can get to a two-step rule. If your filaments have vastly mismatching luminance values, you have almost no wriggle room in the pattern spacing, you need to be running low layer heights, below 0.16, and you need to be alternating, because anything else will probably easily be visible, and you will also expect it to show on camera, especially if your camera is technically quite good. But in the cases where you're working with filaments that have relatively close luminance values, then you have a lot more to work with, and you can potentially start dithering with patterns. Does this mean that you need to go filament shopping with your phone in black and white mode? Yeah, I think it does, actually. So this is all a bold theory, and of course there's other reasons colours won't look right together, like relative transparency or differences in the shine, but my research suggests that luminance is the big one, especially when printing in PLA, for example. I can't prove it, even though I sound pretty sure of myself, and the science does potentially check out, but what I can do is I can try and fix this print by changing the filament and not the G-code, using exactly the same G-code, but changing the filament based on matching the relative luminances. Kind of putting my money where my mouth is. I'll link you to the painted model here that was painstakingly prepared by my animator, because there's no way I would have had the patience to colour this in myself. Of course, this knowledge now opens Pandora's box on layer height, because the layer height that you potentially have to use could depend on how well the filaments match each other. And I guess what I'm suggesting here is that we can now predict, potentially with some certainty, based on the relative luminance, what layer height we need to use. As a side note, I think that people in the comments might raise TD, and if you don't know what TD is, it's a HueForge thing. Go watch my HueForge video and I'll explain it. It is essentially an empirical way of measuring how thick one colour needs to be to not show another colour through it. The thing is, it looks like it could apply here, because higher luminance often correlates with a less opaque or lower pigment density material, so the community I think have somewhat latched onto this, but let's be clear, dithering on outer walls is almost always surface reflection and not really transmission at all. I have been running most of my tests on opaque or mostly opaque materials, of course, but if you do print in, say, PETG, then I still don't think it will make that much difference. Anyway, just to put a lid on this chapter if you still aren't convinced, miniatures can even be possible when you apply everything we just learned. This is printed on a 0.4 nozzle. For the bulk of this video, I've been using Snapmaker's Snapspeed filament. With the exception of the very light yellow and very dark blue, the whole range I've bought seems to be reasonably compatible when it comes to luminance. I would be tempted to try the blue-grey as opposed to the blue, or the sky blue, which I do have and it's pretty good. I ordered all these colours before I understood what was really going on, thinking that I just needed to get CMYK or RGBW, and it turns out that's potentially not how you should choose colours at all. So, how should you choose a palette? I'm glad you asked. This cube isn't particularly scientific, but I think it's useful and it's easy to store and use. I just put 4 primaries, i.e. the colours of the actual filament you're using, around the edge, so that you don't have to actually even label the cube. You've already got that label. It's the 4 colours around the edge. That's the system. And then a bunch of different mixers in a very haphazard way around the cube. What it does, I think, is give you a feel of not only the colours you can achieve, but also how well they're going to blend together. I think the reason a lot of people have been drawn to CMY with white is because it will not typically produce any offensive colours, because they all tend to sit in the high end of the luminance chart. Meanwhile, if you want to be technical, I think RGB and W would potentially work much better. But of course, there's more danger that these will not have matching luminances. But the reality of it is you don't really have to conform that well to any kind of colour system. You could use two reds, a black and a white. You aren't making a 2D print, you aren't printing a photograph. I know it's called full spectrum, but you don't actually need to use the whole spectrum. If you want pastels, you can mix for pastels. If you want bold colours, you can mix for bold colours. So far as I could see it, there's no rules on how to actually do this. There's just a set of rules on how it will likely come out if you use certain colours. One of my favourites is actually mixing CMY with a bright orange. Full spectrum is here to stay. I make that assumption based on 2, maybe 3 basic and known facts. Firstly, it costs almost nothing. If you have 2 reels of filament and a printer that doesn't waste much filament on changes, then you're going to always have that option to mix those colours. It's like saying nobody will ever mix 2 crayons on paper. That functionality is there now, and it's there forever. Secondly, we're in the era of the tool changer. What Snapmaker started a year ago, almost all manufacturers are now following. Last year, I predicted to my patrons, because I couldn't be bothered making an actual prediction video, that this would be the year of the tool changer, although I did predict that not all manufacturers would hit it this year, but I was kind of wrong about the second part, mostly. The point is, this is exactly the right time for full spectrum to exist, when a vast amount of users are now going to be able to access the tools to do this. And thirdly, potentially, full spectrum is not done yet. There are things that I didn't cover here, and things that are coming, and things that will improve, and all those things are going to be in your slicer by default. If not now, soon. So I will forego the usual will you use it that I usually put at the end of videos, because I think you will. Maybe not much, maybe a lot, but you will almost certainly at some point be using this. Let me know what you think. Anyway, that was a brief flyby of full spectrum. If you want to take advantage of full spectrum right now, you could check the links in the description, and you'll also find the links to the Snapmaker U1 that made this video possible. In more ways than one, quite literally. I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.